morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Doug Dean. I'm the owner and managing partner of Schaefertz and Dean, and I want to welcome you to our monthly Business Builder Speaker Series. This was an idea born out of the COVID days in 2020 when we couldn't get together in person. We said, let's get together once a month for an hour on Zoom, and we'll bring on a great speaker on a topic that we think is of interest and value to the real estate agents that we serve. And we now have been doing it starting into our fifth year, over 4 years now. We're delighted to have you today. We encourage you to stay connected with our firm. If you've missed prior episodes of the Business Builder Speaker Series, you can follow us on the socials. And if you go to our website at the bottom right, schaefertz-dean.com, go to the resource tab, you can find the Business Builder Series and watch any of our episodes. Today's episode will be up on the website in about another week or so. January's Business Builder topic is listed here, and we'll fill in the chart as the year progresses. And you can find our prior Business Builder Speaker Series on our website. Mark your calendars. Our Business Builder is the third Wednesday every month at 10 a.m. So we encourage you to go ahead and calendar March 19th at 10 a.m. for our next Business Builder. Next month's Business Builder will be Matthew Johnson with Anchor Home Mortgage. Down payments, why sometimes less is more. I do want to thank you for joining us. We know that you're busy and we appreciate you giving us your time. And to make the most of our time, we encourage you to ask questions. You're welcome to either raise your hand or utilize the chat box. I'll monitor the chat box and throw the questions over to our guest speaker today. Our guest speaker today is Debra Betolatti, the Associate Broker and Compliance Broker with Maximum One Executive Realtors. With all that's happened in our industry lately, we thought a Business Builder Speaker Series on compensation, who pays and how, understanding the GAR forms, would be something of value to our real estate agent community. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Debra. Debra, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Doug. And yes, if you could allow me to share my screen, let me just go ahead and get into my PowerPoint. And guys, I know most of you that are on here, you know I love to see your beautiful faces. Feel free to speak, but do raise your virtual hands, please. And that'll get you to the top of the list, or put in your chat. Additionally, what you will do, please, if you have your cameras, stay on camera. I love being able to see your beautiful faces, okay? I like it to be interactive. I don't want to hear myself talk for an hour. I want to know that what I'm giving you is of value. So let me go ahead and get my screen shared. 1 second. Possibly, let's see. Okay, here we go. All righty. You should be seeing my screen now. So obviously, I decided to call this, or to show you a little bit about a buyer consult, because I know that that is the main part of what is getting everybody a little bit nervous about the changes. And here's the funny thing, there really haven't been changes. Are you guys aware of that? That the changes that we talk about, I keep hearing so often, I hear the new laws. Well, there are no new laws, right? How many of you guys understand how long Beretta has been in play? The Brokerage Relationship Transaction Act. That came into play in 1994. So that is not a change, but we're going to move on so you understand a little bit. In order for you to show and give value, because I don't want to go right into the forms without you understanding that you must be able to understand the market, know the area, and then understand what the settlement has done. By understanding what the settlement even is, that will help you in understanding how to present the forms. So who wants to raise their hand and tell me very quickly what they understand the NAR settlement did or what it's about? Anybody? Oh, we got a quiet crowd today. What do you believe that the NAR settlement has done? Okay. Well, I guess what I will do is tell you.
I have my hand up.
Oh, I didn't see it. I apologize. Yeah. So, Doug, you'll have to see that because I'm not.
I'm so sorry. I see Chris Cunningham raised
Yeah.
her
So,
hand.
Chris, go for it.
I believe that it creates transparency, knowing which each side is transparency among the compensation.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's exactly a big, and the major part of the settlement, the transparency of who pays what and how, which is why we're talking about what we're talking about today. So thank you for that, Chris. If I had a chocolate, I'd throw it across the screen. So with that, the ideal situation with the settlement, first of all, I want you I want to answer a couple questions that often come up with the settlement. Well, if I'm not a realtor, does the settlement affect me? The answer is not directly, but indirectly, it does. Because the thing is with the settlement, what the NAR settlement did was it basically protected or put an umbrella of protection over those that are realtors, that are members of NAR. And I am a big proponent of being a realtor. I have been a realtor since 1994. But with that being said, if you're not a realtor, you still have to abide by many of the aspects that were already in existence through Beretta, which means that you have to let the buyer know or the seller, depending what party is your client, who you work for and how you work for in a written agreement. But that was being kind of left to the side for so long. And that is part of the reason. We have to remember that if you are a realtor, you have to abide by the code of ethics, which is that it's not about you. It's about, in this case, the buyer or the seller, whoever your client is. But when you are not a realtor, if you're a real estate agent, you still owe certain things to your client, which is, of course, honesty and being able to be treated the proper way. So even though you technically can't get a code of ethics violation, there are certain things you have to abide by law and by Bretta. Obviously, you want to know their needs and wants, right? So here is the part. Why am I talking about needs and wants when I'm talking about GAR forms? Well, here's the thing, guys. If I am your buyer and I tell Lorna, my agent, hey, Lorna, I saw this perfect house. This house is exactly what I want. And it has everything that I see on it. It's in the price point. It has all the needs and wants that you and I discussed. And Lorna says, yeah, but I called the agent and they're not paying me. So I don't think you should see this house. Would that be the right way to really follow the needs and wants, understanding what the buyer wants, understanding it's not about you? What do y'all think? Anybody want to comment on that? If you do, raise your hand and Doug will have to tell you to speak. Okay, nobody wants to speak today, huh?
Debra Niraj,
Niraj, yes,
go
go
ahead.
for it.
No, so you actually have to be in the best interest of your buyer. And if you do want to get paid, you can always write it in the offer to the seller side and do it that way.
Thank you for that, Niraj. Exactly what I was looking for. You would say to your buyer, hey, you're hiring me to negotiate on your behalf. So I get that, the seller is not paying, but I'm going to do everything in my power to see what I can do. And then, of course, the buyer will have the decision to follow through with whether you're able to get that accomplished or not. So that's what's going to bring us into the forms. I'm going to start with the seller for a moment because it's going to be important to understand in order to understand how to represent the buyer. So if I represent the seller as a client, what form do I need? You can type it in chat or you can raise your hand, or at this point, you can even yell it out. We're small enough. What form do I need? Come on, guys. What form do I need? The F-101, right? The exclusive seller agreement, your listing agreement. That's what you would need if you're using the GAR forms. So simple, exclusive seller agreement. But I represent the buyer as a client. What do I need? The F-110, which is your exclusive buyer agreement. Now, when do I need to get this signed, guys? Everybody should be yelling that out. Go for it, Lorna.
Before
Immediately.
you cross the
is-
threshold,
Yes.
Okay, say that again, Chris. I think it was Chris.
before you cross the threshold,
Before you cross the threshold, before you go to tour the home. So the NAR settlement says it must be done prior to prior to touring the home, because you're all tour guides now. Did you know that? So you're all tour guides. So before you tour a home, and that means virtual too, by the way. So if you're doing a virtual showing or an actual showing, you must, by law, have had this signed and by the settlement. Now, Beretta law says when? When do you have to get it signed? By Beretta. Before you engage into a client relationship. So either way, you should get accustomed to getting a buyer consult done and getting this done before you ever go show properties or before you engage in any real contract negotiations. Now, if I'm my buyer broker and I'm working with a buyer as a customer, you know, it's funny. This one, I am constantly being asked, why would I work for free? This whole NAR settlement, I'm working for free. How many of you guys, let's be honest, have ever gone out there and shown a property without having a buyer brokerage agreement signed? Guess what? You were working for free. So don't give me the I don't want to work for free, because you already were. And now we have to take a step back to re-educate our clients in order to understand we are professionals. Get that word in your head. You are professionals. You have value. So you want to make sure that you engage into this written agreement. But if you choose to work with a buyer as a customer, there is a form that is needed. When would I want to work with somebody as a customer? Anybody? When would I want to go ahead, Lorna?
Perhaps if you're the listing agent and the person wants to see the home, you'll let them know that you're already representing.
Thank you for that. Yes, so
seller.
that would be the only time that I would ever suggest that. But what has happened historically, like Lorna said, if you're a listing agent and somebody wants to just see your home, your listing, that would be the only time that I would suggest that. However, we often get these calls of investors, right? I'm an investor. I don't want to sign a contract with anybody. I want you to show me the property. And in their head, because of historically what has happened, is you are going to reduce your compensation and say, okay, that's what they're looking for, guys. So why would you lower your value? Let's not do that. So, but if you are a buyer broker working with a buyer as a customer, in the sense of that, the latter example I just gave of a investor that wants to see a home and doesn't want to negotiate with you they don't want any of your advice. They simply want to see the home and write a contract. Then you would use the F-116. The F-116, however, was changed mid-year last year, where it actually puts the buyer on the hook for a payment. So if we go back to the original way that Lorna was talking about, where you're the listing agent, there is another form that we have created. I am a seller's broker, and an unrepresented buyer, a customer, wants to tour and make an offer on my listing. No agreement regarding compensation because you already had that agreement with your seller. Then you could use the F-117. That's the new form that you can use. And that is perfect for the situation that Lorna was first describing. Now, if I'm a buyer broker and the buyer only wants to tour the property, and I'll have a BBA signed later or a customer agreement signed later, again, that investor type of situation, I don't suggest you do this, guys, because you're not a listing agent in this case. This is basically the freebie that you're saying, you know, it's the trial period that the buyer is saying, I want to see if I want to work with you, but go show me a house or two. That's you working for free. And that is the F-118. Personally, I would never suggest this, but you run your business. All right, let's look at these forms. Let's understand how the seller's agreement is done first in order for you to understand the buyer agreement. So if I have the listing agreement here, there used to be a way where we could just simply put, you know, whoops. Oh, it didn't. Hang on a second. Sorry. Why is it not working? Okay, for some reason. All right, let me go back a second.
Good, there it came.
Yeah, it just took a minute. So on this one, but this is number 4, so I want to go back to, okay, yeah, all right. So if you look right here, let me get my little spotlight here so I can show you. If you go over here, you have the ability, this is the compensation for your professional services, right? This is what I am going to get paid as the listing agent. That's how I like to view it. So if Steve is my seller, I'm going to say, Steve, this is my value. And remember, value. Part of the reason we changed it to compensation is because we don't want it to sound like, hey, I'm going to charge you more. I'm going to get paid more. No, this is a value for professional services. So we put in here the compensation to me as your seller's broker. This is what I get paid. This is what I work for. Keep in mind, this is for you to represent the seller. Nothing to do with the buyer. This is why when the investor calls you and says, well, it's your listing, you can reduce your compensation. This is where my compensation, my agreement with my seller has nothing to do with you as a buyer. So this second part, however, if I'm listing Steve's property, I have a couple choices. I didn't used to have these choices. I have the not initially offering compensation to the buyer's broker, but marketing that I'm open to receive it. This simply means that Niraj calls me and says, Debra, what is your seller offering? I say, I don't know. Bring me an offer and we'll see. That is what that means. And who am I looking out for in this case? My seller. I'm in the best interest of my seller, because if I immediately say whatever I'm willing to offer, it may or may not be in the best interest of my seller. You're going to have to see what is in the best interest of your seller. Number 2, right here, would be the old-fashioned way. So, and we're going to see an example in just a moment, but I may say, yes, I'm going to get paid this. I'm going to either share or you are going to pay above and beyond. So what this means, and the difference, is liability. The seller, in addition to the compensation paid, we've all been trained in the train the trainer classes to state that the seller will pay in addition, because, and Doug could talk to that further in another time, but as far as it brings the liability onto the seller versus you, the sharing. So with that, the seller, in addition to the compensation, is what I would do if I am going to use this one. And then, of course, the no compensation. Anybody think we should ever use the no compensation offer to the buyer's broker? What do y'all think? Absolutely. It's in the best interest of the seller, whatever is in the best interest of the seller. What about a FSBO, guys? Remember, in a FSBO situation, this FSBO might say, I'm going to pay you X amount, but only if you bring me the buyer. I would turn that situation around and say, no, I want to represent you. with that same amount you're already willing to pay. Because guess what? Even if he writes no compensation, but we get an offer that is asking for compensation, we still by law have to present that offer. So now if that FSBO, for example, sees that, okay, I said no compensation, but this offer is exactly at list price. It works in my best interest. Okay, I'll pay. You see what I'm saying, guys? So again, if we take ourselves out of the equation as agents, but look at our client, in this case, the seller, you're going to decide which one of these options is going to work in the best interest of your client. Because we tend to just say, oh, this and this, and just pick it. No, think about it. There's a reason there's more than one. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Not initially offering.
Deborah,
Yes.
Deborah, we got Niraj, do you have your hand up?
Sure. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I do. The question I had was, in what situations would you use the other checkbox?
Oh, you're going to see that right now. Thank you for that question, Niraj.
Okay.
Yes, we're going to look at that right now. So whether compensation is being paid to buyer broker, not initially offering, or marketing that the seller is, but marketing that the seller. This is the one. Hey, Niraj, what are you off? What's your seller offering? I don't know. Bring me an offer. That's that one. Now, you see here, it says select all which are applicable. I could use this one and number 2. So what would happen in this scenario is if Niraj is my seller and I tell him, I want you to pay me X amount, and that's for me, and we're not going to offer initially, but I'm going to go ahead and put on number 2 what he is willing to offer. I'm not allowed, when an agent calls me and says, what's your seller offering, to say what they're offering, but I have put my seller on notice as to what they're willing to pay. So it's kind of setting the proper expectations. So let's look at a couple examples of this, okay? Let's see. Oh, for some reason, it is not showing me the examples. Okay, give me a second because it's not showing me the examples. I'm not happy about this. Give me a second. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Any questions while I stop sharing for a minute just to see what's going on here?
I think when Niraj mentioned the other, we were in paragraph A, which basically said the seller agrees to pay the listing agent a percentage, a flat dollar figure, and the other you might use for a combination. I'm going
Correct.
to pay you this plus this. So I think that, Niraj, that might have been the answer you're looking for, is the first 2 options were percentage and flat dollar, and the other could be anything that's not just one or the other above.
That is correct. And then we are going to, here, let me go ahead and share again. We are going to see the example. For some reason, it wasn't working, but I think it's going to work now. So let's look at under the NAR settlement, and then you're going to see. In what I was realizing was I didn't put the examples in the seller side. I only put them on the buyer side. So Niraj, exactly what Doug said is basically, if I said, if I sell it within, you could also put another, if I sell it within 30 days, it's this. If I sell it within 60 days, it's that type of thing. You can basically do whatever you want. The key in all of this is you are allowed to negotiate however you want with your client, as long as you're both in agreement. So if I want to, instead of charging a percentage or an amount, I want to instead charge a car. I want you to give me your car. I could technically put that there. It doesn't matter. But if I also want to put a combination of it, well, it's going to be X amount of percentage and X amount of whatever, so a flat fee plus a percentage, anything like that. You can get creative, guys. There is nothing about this that doesn't allow you to be creative. We've always been negotiable in compensation, but we forgot about that and we started to create the standard, which is what caused the issue. So let's look at this, and then you'll see the examples in the buyer side, and that might help you with the seller side too. But the buyer under the NAR settlement must be obligated. Remember, must be obligated, not it's a possibility. they are obligated to pay the buyer broker's entire compensation. So what the key in this is that we have to tell the buyer what they're on the hook for. So the broker cannot have the buyer, for example, pay nothing. In the previous forms, it actually allowed you to say the buyer owes me nothing. It's only if I get paid by the seller. Can't do that because the buyer has to know they're on the hook for the entire compensation. But for example, in this example, you're giving me permission to negotiate for up to, say, 3% in this case. And by the way, you can't say up to, you can't say anything that's ambiguous. It has to be a number. So in this case, I put the example of 3%. And then, for example, buyer's broker compensation should not be increased by amendment later. The thought process behind this is if I'm telling you this is my value and you find out suddenly that they're paying you more later, you can't just amend that agreement because your value should not have changed. And this is the premise also about bonuses. With a bonus, you've got to let the buyer know that they're on the hook for that bonus with an exact amount. And there has to be something outside of the norm that you do that creates the ability to collect that bonus. So for instance, if I'm just showing a new construction and they're offering me a bonus, I didn't do anything I wouldn't normally do. So I'm not technically, as per many schools of thought, this is still up in the air. For the many schools of thought is that I am not doing anything above and beyond, and I should not be allowed to collect that bonus. And as I've taught in many of my classes, you're better off if they're offering you a bonus and you didn't have it in your original buyer brokerage agreement, give it to your buyer. You will probably see it come back threefold and probably more so than you ever were going to get on a bonus based on other referrals. But that's what that is about. And then any payment by the seller or the seller's broker towards the buyer's compensation must reduce the compensation obligation. So you can't double dip. You can't get this from the buyer and this from the seller, which is what kind of presented itself in the old ones.
Deborah, just to clarify that, you can be paid by both, but your buyer is responsible for the full payment.
Correct.
So if your commission is, or excuse me, your compensation is 3% and the seller is offering 2%, you can take 2% from the seller, 1% from the buyer.
Correct. Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, but they need to know they're on the hook for the entire 3%.
Niraj
Yeah, I
has got a
said,
question.
and Lorna too.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So my question was, assuming they agreed to the 3%, then the seller is paying the buyer's broker 2.5%. There is that delta of the 0.5%, which the buyer is on the hook for, but then the buyer changes their mind and says, oh, you know what? Can you just settle with the 2.5%? Is that something acceptable, or are they still on the hook for the additional 0.5%?
That question, can you receive less? You can always receive less. You cannot receive more. So that's what we're going to go into right here. So yes, you absolutely can say that. But again, that goes into my value classes where I'm going to tell you, no, you've already presented your value to your buyer. You don't want to drop anything, but that's your choice and your business decision that yes, you can. You're totally fine doing that, taking just the 2.5 if that's what you want to do.
Lorna, did you have a question as well? Go ahead.
I did. So in that situation where they're only offering the 2.5% and the buyer, based on our buyer brokerage agreement, has said that they would pay the 3%, where would you write that up? Does the 0.5% go on the F259? And if so, where?
Okay, thank you for that question, Lorna. So let's go ahead and go there and just hold that question for a minute because you're going to see the answer right now. So let me go through this part and then we're going to go right to what you just asked. So the buyer agrees to pay the broker the compensation set forth. Okay, this is a must. And you're talking about your value of the compensation. There's different ways you can write this. I'm going to use this example of other here. And I'm going to put, in this case, 4% plus 475 admin fee and 0.0012. This is how I would suggest, and that's how I teach. Now, make sure that that admin fee is a true admin fee. You can't just make one up, right? So if you truly have an admin fee that your office charges or anything like that, you can do something like this. You could put it up here on one and then the other part on three. I like to have it all in one place. So that's my choice. Now, I don't believe used a little X on this, so I'm going to show you right here, but obviously you want to make sure that this says directs. So this has to say that the possible payment of compensation by seller or seller's broker, that the buyer is giving you permission to get that compensation. So if I tell you, yes, you are on the hook for the 4% plus 475 plus 0.012, and I just need your permission to negotiate to try to get it from the seller. Are you good with that? I doubt any buyer's going to say no, but that's where you would say, yes, I want to be good with that. And here is the key, provided it does not exceed. That answers Niraj's question. Can you accept less? Yes. Can you accept a penny more? No. So as long as it does not exceed, you're good. And then the automatic reducing of the compensation. So that right there is going to be what's going to be going on. Now, I want you to take note of number or section E right here. This is how I present it to the buyers. I explain to the buyer, yes, this is my value, but you are hiring me to negotiate with the seller. So I'm going to do what I can to get that number down. But I need you to understand that you are obligated to pay my compensation. You're on the hook for that. And you're obligated to pay anything that the seller does not cover. So if I'm telling you that my value is 4, they are paying 3, you are responsible to pay that difference of the 1. But here's the key, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, you're not on the hook for anything until you sign that offer, that agreement, until it's binding. So before we go binding, I'm going to make sure that you understand what you're going to be on the hook for at that point. That is going to affect it, you need to be aware of before we go binding. You need to make sure that you can fulfill my compensation of 4%, and you need to make sure that you don't accept something that you can't afford or you don't want to pay. That's how I present it to them. And at that point, that way this is all done before we ever see a house. So it's a lot easier for a buyer to comprehend all this if they're understanding that you're going to go to bat for them and that you're going to really work towards their best interest. Now, oh, I did put the directs. Okay. In this case, let me go back here. In the value of the professional services right here, you're going to see that you can, oh goodness, sorry about that, guys. It kept flipping out. Let me go out of here. Let me ask you guys this. Of what we've gone through, are there questions before I move on to the next one real quick? Any questions? Okay, everybody clear on what I've said so far? Okay. No questions. Wow, I'm shocked. Okay, so let me go to Lorna's point then. 1 second. Let me go right there. I don't know why my computer, let me go back over here. My computer's giving me a little bit of an issue, so I apologize. Let's go. All right, so let me go back to this section right here. And from current slide. Okay. So with this, let me share my screen. Okay. So again, first let me answer this other question here with this 4% here. Whatever I'm going to put here, like Niraj was saying, is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure they're clear on all of that. Now, that possible reduction is key. Now, where is it going to matter for me? as far as if I said, okay, you're going to pay me whatever you're going to pay me, right? In this case, 4%. And the buyer agreed to pay that 4%. The seller agreed to pay me 2%, let's say. Okay. So in this case, what I would need to do, let me pull this up over here, is do it on the agreement and the instructions to closing attorney.
We
So
don't
that
see anything,
Mhm.
Deborah, excuse me. We don't,
see any document.
no,
Yeah.
I'm about to share it.
oh, okay. Okay.
No, you're fine. I'm trying to see if I had the 259 to show you real quick. So that's what I wanted to show you first. That's what I was looking for. But I thought I had put the 259 in here, so that's what I was looking for. In the 259, I may just pull it up directly just to show you. In the 259, I would go ahead and make sure that I didn't have it in here. Okay, that's crazy. But let me go ahead and pull this one up. In the 259, Lorna, I would go ahead and just put what the buyer is paying as well as what the seller is paying. I'll pull it up in just a moment so you can see that. But what I would do is if I say, for instance, in my 259 that my buyer or my seller is supposed, the seller is supposed to pay 4%. Let's say I'm going to ask for that 4%, right? I'm going to be asking for that 4%. And then I'm going to tell them, let me just go to that screen because it gave me a different one right here. And I'm going to tell them in the 259, though, I'm also going to put 4%. And if they come back and they sign it with 2%, then I'm going to negotiate with my buyer again, that 2%, have that put on the 259. But is it necessary? Not absolutely, as long as it's in here. This is the key part right here. It's got to be in here. I'm going to use this instructions to closing attorney to show you. So in the instructions to closing attorney, you would have, in this case, 7%, right? Wouldn't that be nice? And then the seller is getting paid, or is paying the listing broker 7%, and they are sharing 3%. Okay, this is how it should look like. And guys, I know that the 258, the 259 all say you don't need the instructions to closing attorney if one of those is signed. But since we made the changes on the 259, you do need these instructions to closing attorney. Make Doug's life easier, make all the attorneys' lives easier. So this has to be in there. So in this case, this is a typical, the seller is paying and sharing, sharing the commission is the agent. Okay, this is what this would look like. This is seller's broker with buyer's broker. Let's look at a different example. In this case is the 7 plus the 475 admin fee. This is you as a listing agent. That's what the listing agent's getting paid. And then they are sharing the 3%. That's a different way of doing it. Okay. But again, you're putting it all in there for the listing agent, for the closing attorney to see. Then in this case, this is the listing agent sharing with the buyer's agent. I'm sorry, the first one was the seller. I said listing agent before, but it was the seller. So this is the seller's broker with the buyer's broker. Okay. So as you can see, you have the seller's paying buyer's agent. You have this right here. And then you have seller's broker or seller to buyer's broker. So if it's being paid by the seller to the seller's broker, it's going to go on this one, on number 1. If it's being shared by the seller's broker, it's going to go on 2. And then here, it's going to be paid by seller to buyer's broker. And then let's put it over here again so you can see it. In this, say here, the 7 plus the 475, but they're only paying the buyer's broker 2. What now? What do we do now? Well, this is what we do. All right. So this is how the instructions to closing attorney is going to be how they're going to be able to know at the attorneys how much to pay you. Make sense? Everybody understand that? This is probably one of the most misused forms right now because you're assuming because you have the 258 or the 259, you don't need this. The instructions, how you're going to be able to really make it clear. So if you're not doing that, you're going to have a problem. Now, if you are doing any type of rebates.
Deborah, forgive me, will you back up one page?
Sure.
I apologize because I didn't follow the math. The comment I was going to be made, and I hope I don't steal your thunder, is listing brokers are paid in only one way, and that's by the seller. Buyer's brokers are paid in three ways, either directly by the seller, shared by the seller's broker, or by the buyer. And that's why there are four options here. One is, what does the seller pay their broker? And the other three options is, how is the buyer's broker compensated?
Correct.
By the seller, by the co-op agent, or by the buyer. I just didn't follow the math here because we started with 7%, we shared 2%, and the buyer paid 4%.
So, yeah, I probably, so math isn't my strong point, right? That was actually because I had it with a different number up here.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you for noticing that.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something.
No, you are correct. I was trying to use numbers that aren't normal numbers, and I obviously did this wrong. So
No, that's all right. If the first one read 6% with 2
correct.
and 4, you got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's assume this says 6, guys.
All right, no problem. I just
No, thank you, because you were probably not the only one confused. So with that being said, yeah, now it could say 7. Let's be honest. It could say 7. It could mean that now Niraj said, look, I'm not going to make you pay me the full 5, right? So, but in 2, the seller's paying me 2 and you can pay me 4, right? I mean 3. Yeah, so the math, like I said, math is not my strong point. I'm surprised my husband's not cracking up there. But that's where you understand. Lorna, go for it.
So is this in the instructions to close an attorney?
This is in the instructions to closing. This is once you've
Okay.
negotiated an amount. So let's kind of assume, let's go back to this one. Let's assume this says 6, okay? 6 says, so this is 6, and it's being paid by the seller to the seller's broker. So it's being paid from the seller to the listing agent. And then the seller is paying an additional 2. Wouldn't that be nice? So so that would be that the listing agent is getting paid 6. The buyer broker is getting paid an additional 2. So you have 1 and 3, like Doug said. 1 is the listing agent is getting paid this, and then the buyer's agent is getting paid an additional amount. So if we go for it.
Is it an additional amount, or is it that the seller is paying 2%
This would be an
of
no.
the 3% that they're sharing?
This would be an additional amount.
I think the answer to Lorna's question is, if the listing broker was sharing it, it would be in number 2, not
2.
number 3. So it reads 7%, and if that 7% was being shared by the brokers, it'd be in number 2.
Correct.
That all 7 is
So-
going to the seller's broker, and the seller is paying the buyer's broker 2% on top of that.
Okay, so where would, if it is, let's say 6%, and the listing broker is sharing only 2% with the buyer broker, where is the additional 1% going on this instructions to close an attorney that the buyer is responsible for?
That would be right here. Let me go to it. That would be on number 4.
Number 4.
So in this case, if it was being shared and we had number 3, let me see, I thought I had it in here. let's see, I'm also working on one screen. I'm not used to working on one screen, so let me.
I think the answer to Lorna's question is if that 7% was shared by the listing broker 2%, it would go in item number 2, shared 2%.
Correct.
The additional 1% paid by the buyer would go in item number 4, that the buyer owes his broker 1%.
Correct.
So,
So,
two and 4.
Correct.
correct, if it's being shared. And again, we
Okay.
don't recommend that you do it that way. So, but if you're on the listing side, you want it to be in addition to. So in that particular example, the number 1 would actually say 4, for example. So if you were getting paid by the seller 4, and then the seller was paying an additional 2, it would be on 3. So the key is compensation paid by seller. This is number 1 is the listing broker. Okay, this is the listing broker, whatever the listing broker is getting paid. If number 2 is if you're sharing. Number 3 is if it's on top of. Did that help? Or did I just confuse you more?
No, that's fine. I got it.
Or whatever buyer is responsible for. Okay. So it's basically just like Doug said. Let me go back in here a second. My computer decided.
Debra, I have a question.
Go for it.
Yes, so on the 4th, where the compensation is being paid by the buyer to the buyer's agent, is it the total amount that we agreed on the brokerage agreement goes there, or the difference goes there?
The difference.
Difference, got it.
Yes, that is definitely the difference. So if in Archana's case where the buyer is on the hook because of your 110, they're on the hook for say 3%. So they're on the hook for 3%. The seller's agent, the listing agent, said that the seller will pay 2%. Then the difference will be that 1%. So that 1% would be paid by the buyer, and that would be placed on number 4.
Got it, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm sorry that I used the wrong numbers. I probably should have used different numbers and made sure the math worked out. But with that being said, it will, the key is understanding whether it's being shared or whether it's being paid by the seller. We are going into a decoupling system. What I mean by that is if it gets to the point where the seller, you just assume that the seller is going to pay on top of, there's not going to be any sharing. So the sharing would be gone. And that's what the assumption is that's going to be happening in the next few years. So that's why I'm encouraging everybody to use number 1 as far as what you get paid, and then number 3 what the seller is going to pay. And then of course 4 what the buyer's paying. So in essence, at some point, number 2 may be gone. But that's basically what we're looking at there. Okay. So if you are paying any outside fees, if there's any fees that are going to be paid outside of closing type of thing, for instance, a stager, then that would be also placed in here. So any stager, and Doug wouldn't know unless you let him know. If you're giving a rebate back, maybe you paid a home warranty, again, that would be something that you would put on here. Okay. And you can put who it's going to be paid to as well. So Doug, anything on this one that should be, on your end?
No, this is very helpful, but I'm just trying to remember real quickly. Is this deducted from the commission or is this on top of the commission? In other words, is this paid out of the selling broker's commission to the stager, paid out of the buyer's broker to the home warranty?
So that is a great point, because normally I let you know to make sure that you do it, you state it. So because it is confusing. I've had that comment before, so it's not really clear on how it's done here. Because the way that it reads, the amount of fees and or rebates paid, it could go either way. You see what I mean? So
Right.
I don't like how this form is stated. So what I would put on here is 700 stager, and then that's where here I would actually, I should have put 702 AB home stager on top of or as a rebate. So you really have to specify it because it's not clear in the way the form is.
I read the form to say that it's being paid by the broker, therefore it's a reduction to the broker's commission. So
That's how it should be, but I think that there's been a lot of issues with that. But I'm glad to hear you're reading it that way because I've had issues with other attorneys not reading it that way.
yeah, I would read out of the listing agent's commission, pay the stager 700, and out of the buyer broker commission, pay 700 for the home warranty.
Correct. That's how I read it too. But that's why I've just been this is where this is one of the few times where I think more is better. So even though it's that, and if you're doing it with Schaefer Dean, we know he reads it the same way I do. But if not, I would just put, on top of, or, but it's supposed to be, the first page is supposed to be all the commission being paid, and this is supposed to be a rebate or a fee. So in my opinion, it's exactly what you're saying, but I've seen it misconstrued.
If you did intend for the buyer or seller to pay that on
It should
top,
be on the first page.
exactly, it would be in the section on the first page, paid by seller or paid by buyer. I read these to be rebates or deductions from commissions.
I agree. Yeah, to me, that's where the other would come in here too.
Right.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Would this need to be in the contract?
No, thank you for that question, Myrna. So, that is great. That's a great question. Does this need to be in the contract? You mean the instructions to closing?
No,
Oh.
when you say the seller pays
Gotcha.
1 year, whatever.
So yes, if that is something that, for instance, if the seller is going to pay the choice home warranty, then that would probably be something that was agreed to either at the initial contract or at the amendment to address concerns. So we do need a paper trail that it states it somewhere. If, for instance, it was the stager, I would put that into the listing agreement, or that's where I would do an amendment for the listing agreement stating that the buyer or that the seller is paying the stager. I mean, the seller's agent is paying the stager.
Debra, you can tell me if I misstated, but I view the instructions to closing attorney is a recap of obligations that exist elsewhere. The
Exactly.
seller's obligation is in the F101 exclusive, and the F110 is the buyer's obligation.
Exactly.
Paying the home warranty was probably specified that the buyer's broker will pay it, was a special stipulation in the contract. So everything that's reflected here has a source somewhere other than this document.
Correct. And so, but as far as the contract, it should be either in the buyer agreement or the listing agreement if it was originally agreed to, and if not, into the contract. So yes, would it be in the contract? Yes, somewhere in the contract if it was a later agreement. But like Doug said, it's going to have a source one place or another. So it'll be somewhere. You can't just arbitrarily all of a sudden charge them, no. Or say they can't arbitrarily expect you to pay for it. But if you agreed to it, then yes.
I have a question.
Go for
So,
it.
what happens if the stager was already paid by the listing agent?
So if the stager was already paid by the listing agent, you should have stated it, in my opinion, in your listing agreement. But if you did, just put it in there, if, well, you were already paid, or you already paid them. That's a good question. Doug, how would you want it written in there?
If there was an obligation to pay it and it had already been paid, we would just need some sort of notation, and the instructions to closing attorney would be fine. The 700 that the seller is reimbursing the seller's agent $700 for the home stager.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's exactly what Archana just mentioned is where I've seen this issue with this last page being used for that scenario. So what they'll do is they'll put on here, instead of a rebate, they'll put that the seller's reimbursing, but that's not really where it should be, but that's what happens. That's where I was telling you it's kind of confusing.
My preference would be on the prior page in the other section. The seller paying their agent a compensation and additionally reimbursing $700 for the home stager.
I agree. But yeah, so for instance, Archana, though, where it becomes an issue is if you said, okay, I'm charging you $6,000 as my compensation, and you paid outside of that another $1,000 for the stager. So now you've paid $1,000 for the stager, and you expect to get reimbursed that $1,000 and get paid the $6,000, then that's where it would become an issue, because it can't exceed the amount you were going to charge your seller.
Got it. So that has to be stated on the broker
Listing
agreement saying
agreement.
I'm going to charge you so much for the staging or like the photo shoot or whatever that is.
Right. And that's where you can use that other button on the seller side in the list, $6,000 plus $1,000 of stager fee only when home sells, reimbursement for, or you could use it as a special step, listing agent to pay stager, but seller agrees to reimburse at time of closing.
Got it. Thank you.
For the page 2, are fees or rebates paid by either the seller or buyer's broker? If it's an obligation that the buyer or seller is paying, it belongs on page 1.
Yeah, this is why it's great when I have Doug with me, so he can answer that part of it, because he's the one that uses this way more than we would. So we want to make sure that it's easy for Doug. So I know this is a tough topic. I know this is a topic that people are getting confused left and right on these forms. And so I wanted to bring it up. But additionally, what I want to tell you that the biggest thing with this is communication. So make sure you're talking to your clients, make sure they understand what they are on the hook for. Whether it's a seller or a buyer, they need to know what they're on the hook for. That is the key transparency part of this. My information is right here. I do want to tell you a couple quick strategies as far as the buyer brokerage agreement and presenting it to them. Explain to them your value. People they will see the benefit over the price. If you can show the value, then they're not going to have a problem paying you. So just make sure you're demonstrating what you're going to be doing. Set the proper expectations. Hey, Sandy, I'm going to charge you X amount, but that's because I'm worth it. My value is this. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure to work within your budget. Because if we sit there and just say, well, I'll reduce it if they don't pay me the full 5%, I'm going to go ahead and accept 3. How strong am I going to be in negotiating the value of your home? So we want to make sure that we stick firm with our values. Will we lose clients? Absolutely. You will. I'm not going to tell you you won't, but are those clients you want? Because trust me, you start rebating, you start reducing your own value, they will let everybody else know. But at the same token, you demonstrate your value, you demonstrate your worth, they will also tell everybody they know. So, any questions before we end this?
Yes, I wanted to just make sure I'm clear with the instructions to the attorney. Number 1, I was putting like the 6%, the total amount that the seller was paying. And then in number 3, putting what they were sharing, which would be the 3%. But you're saying no, put 3 for what I'm supposed to receive and any admin fees. And then on line 3, put that 3%. So that.
Correct, but it has to match your listing agreement. So whatever you put on your listing agreement, I'm going to say, you're going to be responsible to pay me my worth. My worth is 3. And then you can, that's where I like the number 1 that says no initial offer of compensation. And then I'll go ahead and mark 2 as well, though. So I do 1 and 2. And the 1 would say no initial, the 2 would say you're going to pay 3 on top of.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just on that quick note, I see Niraj's comment. I just had a buyer tell me they can't afford my value, would not sign an agreement. It's going to be a matter of rehearsing. We should be practicing role playing all the time. And if you can demonstrate to them, and have where you need to spend the most time, in my opinion, is in your buyer consult. If you're telling them in your buyer consult, you're finding out their needs, their wants, you're finding out, okay, you only have 20,000. Once you pay me my compensation, it's 35,000. Okay, you can't afford my value, but you can't afford not having my value either, because I'm going to do everything I can to work within that 20,000. So that doesn't mean, so I need you to sign in order for me to work on your behalf. I'm not going to make up that money. You're not going to sign a contract where you have to pay me 35 when you don't have 35. But I'm going to go and negotiate. I'm going to go to the seller, Michael, and say, Michael, I need you to pay. Oh, I'm not going to pay that full 15 extra thousand. Okay, well, here's the issue, Michael. I have a great willing buyer that's ready to close on your house in 30 days. It's my job to get that to work. So again, you have to demonstrate that value to your buyer, and that comes from practicing. Practice, 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 role play, role play, role play. And it's going to get to the point where they're not going to worry. I mean, we've had several of the agents in our office doing this over and over, and they are having zero pushback because they're showing their value. On the last note I want to mention is, again, in 1 where it says no offer of compensation on a listing agreement, initially, simply, I get a call from Myrna. What's your seller offering? I don't know. Bring me an offer. Let's make this work. And if Myrna says, oh, you just don't want to tell me, if I don't know, I can't show you property, I'm going to say, Myrna, here's the thing. You want to close. I want to close. Just bring me the offer. Let's make this work. So I'm going to let them know that I'm going to be collaborative, but that I also need to play with me, play ball with me. If I use just number 2 on the listing agreement that says an amount and Myrna calls me, I have to disclose, yeah, my seller's offering only 2%. And she's going to be like, okay, we're going to run back into that same issue. So that's why I like 1. And then if they say no compensation, I'm still going to say, Myrna, bring me an offer. Let's see what I can do. And so that way, I think this has opened up the ability for you to demonstrate the value. And it is going to close the doors, in my opinion, to agents that don't know their worth. So it's time to go out there and get your value out there. Your value proposition is key. All right. Well, guys, I hope you got something out of today. Any major takeaway before we go?
Just real quick, Deborah, you were kind enough to do a presentation previously on our Business Builder about helping set forth your worth to clients and customers. And I'd encourage everyone to go back and review. You'll find that on our website, resource tab, Business Builder, and you'll find one where Debra gave some tips on demonstrating your value to potential clients and customers. So I'd encourage you to go back and review that presentation. It's very topical with what we're discussing now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, if anybody has any major takeaways, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, last minute questions. And
Deborah, I have a question.
Mhm.
I wanted to know, there was a situation I had one time where the buyer accidentally worked late and made a large payment on a credit card. They had some cash, but when we got to closing, they couldn't use it, obviously. And so the buyer didn't have all of the money. And to make the deal work, of course, I took a reduction in commission. So my question is, in those instances where they just make mistakes like that and don't have enough to cover the fees, and you really need to close the deal for all intents and purposes, how do you write off the difference? It's not a value question. It's just a true, honest mistake that they made. What do you do in that situation?
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, I said, sure, that's a great question. And I've heard that often too. So it's not just a simple mistake, in my opinion. I'm going to give you my opinion real quick. I think the key there is the buyer consult needed to be a little bit firmer, because that's number one. You want to make sure you're telling your buyers these things. So that's part of my buyer consult. Don't you dare spend anything on anything without speaking to me and your lender. So to me, that would be my mistake. If I made that mistake, that would be my mistake. So in that case, do I need to make it work? You know, I probably would. I'd do exactly what you did. You don't have to do anything paperwork wise, as long as it doesn't exceed what you originally told them, to answer that part of it. But to me, I see that as a mistake from myself in that situation, or the lender, because the lender should have also stated to them, don't be doing that. Did the lender and did you tell the buyer and they just went ahead and did it out of curiosity?
No, it was not anything that they intended to do. The person worked, I think, a couple of night jobs, and he was needing to make the payment on a credit card. And he, instead of him putting, I think, $50 to make the regular minimum payment, he did like $5,000. It was like a lot of money.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, we couldn't get the refund from the bank back in time, and the closing was like, I think, like within a few days. So, and I said that to say 2 points. So that's what happened. But also in the situation with the bonus, because I did that, I did not receive basically much commission, because we made the deal close. But there was an opportunity where I have had a situation where I've sold a new construction, I received a bonus. And I guess what I'm saying is that in some situations, those things balance out. You may not have done anything above and beyond per se, but there are instances where you've taken reductions to make a deal close for the best interest of that family. Correct. So you've taken a lower pay, but in some way you were rewarded. So in some instances, bonuses do work. It's not necessarily because you've went above and beyond in maybe that situation, but in prior circumstances, it's almost a reward for doing a good deed, in my respect, for helping that buyer out. And he has told so many people to contact me because he remembered how well we made his deal happen. And but like I said, I've taken other bonuses because I know it kind of balances out. So I hear what you're saying, and I know the school of thoughts differ, but I do think
I'm in agreement. I would have done the same thing. I will tell you right now, Deborah, I would have probably done the exact same thing in that situation. I thought it was a situation where he was just arbitrarily spent more.
No, it was an honest mistake, because he was just fatigued, tired, trying to make everything happen. And he just made one too many zeros, and it just happened. So that's what I meant. So you're saying we don't need to make any sort of written deduction, just go ahead and make it happen?
Correct. Unless your broker, you want to ask your broker. Some brokers will want that paper trail. I'm not too worried about it because the paperwork says not to exceed. So as long as it doesn't exceed, I'm good. But what I would say to your comment, just as an FYI, what you said was key. You said in the best interest of the client. So as long as it's in the best interest of the client, I would have done the same thing. So keeping in mind that part of it. So yes, in that case, I would have done the same thing. As far as the bonus, though, what I'm saying is, I know we've all accepted bonuses in the past, but you cannot accept that bonus in this case after the NAR settlement unless it is in there in the broker agreement from the start. That's my point.
Oh, yeah. No, I understand that. But I was just meaning just in general for people who say don't take them at all. I was just saying there are some instances where it balances out, where in some deals you will suffer loss and some you just rewarded more. So that's what I meant. It just balances out. Yeah.
100%. No, I appreciate you commenting on that. That is perfect. Niraj?
Oh,
Yeah, I have two questions. First one is in regards to if you can kind of give a few examples about the above and beyond situations for bonuses, because the reason why I asked this is because we signed the buyer brokerage agreement. They accepted that, they'll do the 3%, for example. I was able to get that from the seller's broker, but in an example of a new construction, we found after the fact that this builder is offering, let's say, $5,000 bonus if the buyer closes by March 31st. So there's no way I could have had that ahead of time in the agreement because we found it after the fact. So how do we handle that situation?
So I'm going to give you the two different schools of thought, and these are from attorneys, from GAR attorneys. As far as that, part of your buyer consult is going to be, are we going to be looking at new construction? If you say yes, then I'm going to immediately, if I wanted to accept the bonuses, I'm going to immediately say you're going to be responsible for 3% and $10,000 bonus. I would have put that in there immediately, because the key is, as far as amending, you're no longer supposed to be amending buyer brokerage agreements. So in that particular scenario, I get that you didn't know till later, but you can't amend the buyer brokerage agreement. So the issue is you can't accept it based on the fact that it wasn't done originally or stated originally that he was on it. As far as the bonus part of whether you should accept it or not, the key that is the legal part of it that they're talking about is that you are supposed, if you normally attend all inspections, let's say, and then you have new construction and you normally don't do anything for new construction, accepting that bonus is nothing. You're not supposed to. If you normally don't go to inspections, but you now have an out of the country buyer, for example, that, and this has happened to us before in new construction, where he says, can you go and be there and video at the design center and be my person? And I want you to help me choose my flooring. And I want you to be there for every step of drywall and every step thereafter. That would be above and beyond. That would be something outside of your norm. So that would entail you to have a bonus. But just going to a new construction and they're saying, hey, close, that's steering. That's what that whole lawsuit was about. Because we're saying, oh, yes, we're going to get extra money if we close quicker. This one's starting to look better than that one. And I'm not saying you're doing that, but that's what the issue was. So the reality is, in that scenario, in your scenario, if I already had just the regular buyer brokerage agreement, I would be like, you know what, my buyer, my dear buyer, that $5,000 is going right back to you. I would talk to the builder and I would say, I can't accept it. Can you credit my buyer that $5,000 and give it to them in design or extra closing costs or whatever? And like Debra had mentioned, that's going to come back to you, because it's going to be a situation where they're going to be so happy that you did that. And yes, you're going to be out 5,000, but they might refer you to 4 other buyers that are going to bring you way more than 5,000. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you. And
You're welcome.
my second question was, how do we handle a situation where a lender who's been talking to a buyer, and for example, let's say it's an investor, right? And they've been quoted 8.25% interest rate on an investment property. And then the lender suggests to them and said, why don't you go to your agent and ask them to contribute towards your closing costs or towards the rate card?
Well, first of all, I would be very upset with that lender. But yeah, I mean, gosh, other than saying, remember your agreement. So my answer, that's a funny one. My answer to that, Niraj, would probably be, if they came to me, I would have already had a buyer brokerage agreement signed, right? And I would have said, if you recall, you and I have an agreement. I don't have that ability. I would go back to your lender and tell them, why don't you give them a lender credit? No, that's not the right thing to do, but that's basically, I would just explain your agreement with me has nothing to do. I don't have the ability to just negotiate that. And I would be calling that lender and saying that was completely wrong of him. I don't know, Doug, what would you say on that? Because legally, I mean, they should not be saying that.
I get the same thing when, people will say, oh, well, you need to save money. You should turn down the owner's title insurance. It's like, well, I think that's good insurance for the owner, and I wouldn't recommend anybody decline it.
Right.
But a lender, oh, well, you need some money. There's a way you can cut some costs. So I've seen it work both ways. At the end of the day, it comes back to your comment about value. Yes, there's a cost to owner's title insurance, but there is also value to it. Yes, there's a cost to the service that you provide, but there's also a value to it. So you have to get creative in terms of finding another way to get where you're going.
Yeah,
Uh, the only option isn't just cut my commission.
No, and now that Doug just said that, it made me think of the other thing, Niraj, that I would do is, and Doug and I have to talk about this because I want to do a class on closing statements. So the other thing is you could, if they came to me and said that, I would say, you know what, we need to really review that good faith estimate. We have to really review that disclosure. And I always recommend 3 lenders also. So at that point, even if it's the builder's lender, I'd say, let's look at this builder's lender document and let's compare it with 2 others. Because the reality is there might be somewhere in there that they are charging something they shouldn't, or they might be, yeah, they're giving you an 8.25 or whatever, but they're charging you 3 points of origination or something, So if you get to know and read those CDs and those disclosures well enough that you can also compare them with some others, you're going to bring in the value. And where I was going with this is that you as an agent will have the value to review those agreements with them or those disclosures with them to say, I'm glad they're telling you to have me contribute, but all I'm contributing is to fees that we could have reduced by you going to this other lender. Does that make sense?
Yep, definitely.
But yeah, I'd steer clear from that lender.
Yeah, I had a pretty good one-on-one conversation with that person and said, stay in your track, just like how I am. So we're good now.
Good.
Maybe one option is to ask the owner or the buyer, let's look at your homeowner's insurance. What did you select as a deductible? It might be if you can live with a slightly higher deductible, not only will your upfront cost be less, but you'll pay less in your monthly escrow as well. So, like Debra said, look at it line by line and let's figure out some other places to save other than my commission.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, those are all great ways of, there's more ways to skin a cat than one way, right? So, definitely. But the problem is we so quickly go to compensation. We so quickly we're not looking at the whole picture. So make sure that you're understanding the whole picture. But other than that, it's been a pleasure being here today. I hope to see you guys at the next compliance chats that we have, business builders that Doug has, and classes that we offer all over the place that Doug and I both teach at Max One. And I look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Debra, I'd like to thank you again for being our guest speaker today. You're always a wealth of information and grateful for you being our guest. We do record our business builders. We'll clean them up, add the credits and the theme music. And within about a week, they'll get posted on our website, resource tab under Business Builder. So not only will you be able to go and review it again, but you'll be able to share it with anyone else that could benefit from our presentation today. So we'll go ahead and close and thank you all for joining us today. One of my favorite quotes is from Kenny Rogers' song, The Gambler. I hope you found an ace that you can keep. We appreciate you being here today and hope you take away some value from our time today.